All right, so I wanted to do a little talk about why I've decided to kind of embrace tRPC and just use this as my communication layer between my front end and my back end. I've been watching a lot of Theo, and he kind of introduced me to this stack, Create T3 app. He's another YouTuber and a Twitch streamer, so check him out. He has a lot of good information about Next and React and web development. But he kind of talked about this tRPC thing, this library, and I started using it. And I also started using TypeScript recently, and like I think my eyes have just been kind of open to like better ways to write applications. So before I'd write all my code in JavaScript, and it kind of sucked, especially when you run into little bugs where you have to like spend a bunch of time fixing a small error where you like misspelled something, but you spent like 10 minutes trying to figure out where you misspelled it. So TypeScript really helps like make sure that you're passing the right things to the functions and make sure you type everything properly. I definitely argue that you should probably use TypeScript. I'm a convert now. I definitely believe in TypeScript. But this library, tRPC, this kind of replaces the approach of RESTful APIs, right? So instead of writing all these REST APIs, these endpoints and stuff, and having to like know when to nest certain REST routes a certain way, knowing when to use get, put, post, patch, delete, and stuff. I just never really liked REST. Like there's something about REST that just seems very limiting. And I just much rather just call a function on the back end. Like maybe RPC just makes more sense to me. If you don't know what RPC is, it's basically a remote procedure call where the front end is going to actually call a function on the back end, right? It doesn't have to deal with REST endpoints. I mean, it still does HTTP, so there still kind of is like endpoints, but it doesn't have to deal with like having to do like this, to-dos / ID. Doesn't have to do with any of that stuff. And I don't know, RPG just makes more sense to me, especially for like internal services where you don't have like a public facing API. So I just been kind of over the years, I've been using REST for so long and I'm just kind of over it. It's just a lot of overhead just to do something simple like make an endpoint or make a function that someone can call. And tRPC is a library where you can basically do that. So I'm going to walk you through like my setup I have for my project I've been kind of working on. This is my side project. And I want to walk you through why I'm using tRPC and how it actually makes stuff a little bit easier. So on this project, like I'm not going to show you how to set up tRPC. You can read through the docs, but in a nutshell, you have these tRPC routers. And these routers, you basically define functions. Okay, so you can either define a query function that will allow a user to grab data from your backend, or you can define something such as a mutation. All right, so we have query and we have .mutation. So similar to CRUD or post, instead of calling like a delete endpoint on a URL that has like /images /image ID, you just call an endpoint called images.delete, right? And then you pass it an image ID as an actual input. Now you might think, okay, well that's not really that much different from REST, but let me show you the real benefit to this. If I were to basically go to my front end, where I believe is here, and at some point I call delete. So the benefit to tRPC is that the front end has type safety with the back end. So if I were to go to my backend code, remember these are two separate things. There's a front end that's written in, I'm using Next, so everything's in Next, but if I go to my backend code and I were to, for example, require another argument here, like let's say I said name z.string. The cool thing about tRPC is now if I go to my front end and kind of go down to where I call that method. So like I have this tRPC use mutation, which is calling image.delete, which maps directly to that router we talked about. But if I go to where I call this, notice it's red now, right? I got instant feedback. TypeScript told me I'm doing something wrong. If I hover over it, it tells me that I need to pass in name, right? So name of Bob. Now it's good. So maybe you don't understand the benefit of that, but if you've worked with REST APIs and you have to go and you have to look at the actual Swagger definition, or you have to go and look at the GraphQL definition, to have this automatic TypeScript connection between your front end and your back end, and if you're privileged enough to be able to write your back end code in TypeScript and your front end code in TypeScript, this is a game changer, right? So now I can actually like right off the bat know what arguments my backend needs for it to process data. And like I don't know. I can't really explain how much better that is, but it's just a lot better. Just trust me. And then also to know what endpoints you can actually call, like let's say you're new to the API, you're new to the project, you have no idea what endpoints there are. Maybe there's 100 endpoints. Well, if you just do this, you get the IntelliSense that tells you all the different mutations you can just invoke from your front end. I don't have to go look at a Swagger doc or an open API documentation. I just have to do curly braces, and the Visual Code IntelliSense is smart enough to know that these are all the mutations that are available on my backend. So in this case, I want to call image.delete, and there, I can just call that, right? So that is a huge benefit, and getting this stuff set up is really not that difficult, especially if you just use this E3 app creator, like it's just set up with everything that you might need. But yeah, like when I first saw this, I didn't really understand like, well, how is this useful? But to have type safety between your front end and your back end, like I don't think I can live without this anymore. Like I don't want to deal with REST APIs where I have to go and like read through the code to know like what payload I should be sending in. I just want my code editor to tell me I'm doing it wrong and not have to worry about like going to my Chrome, network tab and inspecting it and seeing I got an error or something because I'm not sending something properly or I misspelled something when I'm sending it over. Like I'll know right off the bat if my code is typed correctly. So, I mean, that's kind of like the overview. The same thing applies to queries. I didn't really show you a query. And this code base, I do have it set up with React Query. Like there's an adapter you can kind of set up so that tRPC uses React Query on your front end. So like, let me find you another example. Like you have the ability to say use mutation, which we kind of talked about, but then you also have the ability to call use query, just like you do with React Query if you're familiar with this. And again, like all my queries are typed, right? So I can just like get my IntelliSense, and these are the actual queries that I can do. So if I wanted to get all my bookmarks, well, there's bookmark.get bookmarks. I'm done. Like I just got that IntelliSense. I know exactly what query I can call. And you can namespace these to make these like easier to understand. So hopefully I convinced you why this is important. I know this wasn't like a tutorial teaching you how to use it, but it's more of like this is my opinion on why I'm using tRPC now and why you should probably use it too. Anyway, have a good day and happy coding.